Welcome to week 11 of Design of Steel Structure taught by Professor Damodar Maiti. I am one of the course teaching assistants, Trisha Chakraborty. I am a second year PhD student at the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. Like always, I'll start with a brief recap of what we have done in the previous 10 weeks. There are two broad branches of structural engineering: analysis and design. Analysis is the forward problem, where we are given the structural dimensions, boundary conditions, and applied loads, and we have to find the response induced in the structure. That can be the response is in terms of forces, stresses, deflections, strains, etc. Design is the inverse problem. In design, we are not given the structural dimensions and the loads in the individual elements we are given, and overall the overall loading condition to be withstood by the structure as a whole, and then we are given some criteria on maximum deflection or maximum yield stresses, and then we have to find the optimum size of the structural elements and also their connectivity. So this is a course on design, and this is a course on steel design. We generally in undergraduate courses it starts with concrete design, because concrete is the most versatile material for construction, and around us most of the structures that we still see are made of concrete, reinforced concrete. So why do we use steel? Steel is a much stronger material than conventional concrete. Steel also has a high strength to weight ratio. So that means that to generate the same amount of strength, steel structures are lightweight, so they are used in some specialized structures like towers, bridges, etc. And steel is also ductile compared to concrete. Ductility is a very important property in structural materials, because ductility means that to after yielding, brittle materials fail or break or fracture immediately after yielding. So what happens is that the yield stress is reached, and immediately the ultimate stress is reached and the structure collapses and there is no warning time. But in ductile materials, what happens is that even after the yield stress is reached, the ultimate stress might be increasing very slowly, like the stress might be increasing very slowly with respect to strain, but it allows a large amount of strain deformation to occur before the fracture condition is reached. So before collapse there will be a lot of warning time, and we can that gives us warnings, and as civil engineers, as in engineers, or even as residents, people can foresee that maybe this is about to fail, so we can take sufficient measures like repair or we can evacuate. So during earthquakes, etc., during extreme loading, if there is a sudden brittle failure, there will be loss of life and loss of property, and there will be no chance of saving. But if it is a ductile failure, the maybe the we will see a sway in column, we will see that the beams are like spalling of concrete, and so that 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 is in a RCC building I'm talking about. But steel in general has even more ductility, a lot of ductility, so that gives warning time, and it helps us in taking measures before failure. However, steel is much costlier than concrete, so steel is still used in only specialized structures, and the general residential or institutional buildings that we see around us are made of concrete. Why do we need design? The components individually and the entire structure should withstand the load throughout its lifespan, satisfying the serviceability criteria. So withstanding the loading means that it must not collapse. So that is the collapse or ultimate limit states. Satisfying serviceability criteria are the serviceability limit states or the deflection deformation limit states, and the lifespan is something that we have to define beforehand. Like before we design a structure, we have to decide upon a lifespan like 50 years, 75 years, 100 years, because we have to take into account the deterioration of materials with age, fatigue, creep, all those properties. So we must know before we are designing. We must know the lifespan or decide upon it. We must identify the ultimate limit states, and we must know the serviceability limit states. Only then can we design, and then we have to design it in such a way that the components individually and the entire structure as a whole should withstand whatever we have specified. To properly design a structure, we have to ensure it is economical to construct without compromising safety. So there has to be a balance, and striking this balance. Once we have done it, it is known as cost-effective design. That whether for the minimum to attain a certain amount of some certain level of safety that we want or reliability, we would want to make our structure as economical as possible. So that is the balance that we have to look for, and this requires knowledge of the detailed design procedure in great detail. That we must know all the options available to us, so that we can take a take the best way to make it safe and economical. Mechanical properties of steel. Some five of these physical properties have been detailed in IS 800 2007, the Indian Standard Code for Steel Design. So they've said that irrespective of the grade of steel, these five properties may be taken fixed at these values. So unit mass of steel or density, rho, modulus of elasticity or Young's modulus E, Poisson's ratio mu, modulus of rigidity G, and the coefficient of thermal expansion alpha. These five properties are more or less deterministic. There is not much variation observed in these, so they can be taken at their fixed values. But the the what defines the grade of steel from which one grade of steel, one material steel material may differ from another material significantly are the yield stress and the ultimate stress, Fy and Fu. So these are the principal mechanical properties of structural steel important in design, and the Fy and Fu are these two values are obtained from the stress strain or the elasticity curve. Now, in steel, unlike in concrete, we generally used certain sections, cross sectional, like to have a beam or a column. We will have a cross section and then we'll have a length, right? So the cross sections are generally fixed. They are called rolled sections, and these dimensions and shapes are all fixed. And there are a lot of variation. Of course, it is not just this is an eye section or a joist. There are a lot of there is a large variation in the types of joist, like the dimensions of joist, but they will all look the same. So they have a flange, the horizontal parts that take the flexure. They have a web that takes the shear generally, and also has a tendency to buckle. And then this width of web, the width of flange, this angle, and then the depth of the overall section. So that the depth of the overall section is how we designate this, like ISMB, Indian Standard, I think ISMB Indian Standard Major Beam, I think so. Medium Indian Standard Medium Beam. So ISMB 200 is the name of a certain section whose overall depth is 200 millimeter, and then the other properties, all these other dimensions are mentioned in this IS Handbook number 1, also called as the SP61. That has tabulates all the dimensions. Then it has one designated name, then all the dimensions, and then some derived properties like weight per unit length, geometric dimensions, other properties like moment of inertia, the elastic section modulus, and so on. This is a channel section or C section. This is an angle section where the legs might be equal or unequal. They are commonly used in tension members. This is a T section. These are the hollow sections, square, rectangle, and circle, and these are the solid sections. This is a bar, a small, like these are very small compared to general standard concrete sections. Concrete beams and columns also have the cross section of a square, rectangle, or circle, right? The piles generally have circle, but their dimensions are much larger than the general dimensions of these steel bars. Then there are flats and plates of these this type. Now we look at the stress strain or the elasticity curve of steel. So this is how the stress strain curve looks, and still this is the yield point. After that, there is so much strain. The yield point, this is the strain, and then after this much strain, it will allow the steel will deform before it actually fills. So this part is what makes it ductile. If it stopped, if it just fractured somewhere around here, it will be a brittle material like we see for concrete. So what are these points? It is, okay, to get this stress strain curve, we perform a tensile test on a cylindrical specimen. We increase the tensile load on it, P, and we keep on noting down the P. So dividing the P by this cross section area, we get the stress at each point, like at each increment, and then we have some device in the lab like strain gauges to measure the strain. So we can plot this stress strain curve. A is a limit of proportionality, the point where the linear nature of the stress strain curve graph ceases. So up to A, there the Hooke's law is followed, that is stress is proportional to strain, and this slope, as we know, is the Young's modulus E that we talked about here. This E modulus of elasticity to return to our 5 megapascal generally. Then B is the elastic limit. It is the limiting point for the condition that the material behaves elastically, but Hooke's law does not apply. So A to B is a nonlinear zone, but what is meant by elasticity applies is that if at any point up to B we remove the stress completely, the strain will also vanish completely, and the material, like the specimen, will return to its original configuration. So that means it is still elastic, perfectly elastic. For most practical purposes, it can be assumed that the limit of proportionality and elastic limits are the same. Beyond elastic limit, there will be some permanent deformation or permanent set when the load is removed. So that is what means that it has become partially plastic. So even if the load is completely removed, the strain will not completely go. There will be some kind of permanent deformation, permanent damage, you can say. The C and D are the upper yield point and the lower yield points. Points after which the strain increases without correspondingly high increase in load or stress. You can see clearly that C and D are generally taken to the same as the same point. They are very closely spaced. We can see that this slope is very high up to this, and after this, there is a significant reduce in the decrease in the slope, the stress by strain slope. So after this, it has yielded the material and it has become partially plastic. So after this, it starts to flow, and E is the ultimate or maximum tensile stress, the point when necking starts, and F is the fracture point, that is the point where the material breaks. So the significant properties that we have seen, Fy and Fu. Fy is the stress corresponding to C and D, somewhere between C and D, or we can take either C or D, or an average of the two. And the in tensiles, the stress corresponding to E here will be the Fu. So the general grade of steel that is most commonly used is called Fe 410. 410 is the yield stress, is the ultimate stress, and 250 is the corresponding yield stress. There are other grades of steel even that we have seen in RCC, Fe 500, Fe 650. So they are the ultimate stresses. Now we look at the modes of failure of steel structures: bending, local buckling, shear buckling, web crushing and buckling, and lateral torsional buckling. These are all the collapse limit states or the ultimate limit states. And the term buckling the buckling is a major issue in steel structures because buckling is related to the slenderness ratio of a system. So we have looked at it during the design of compression members. I think in week 7 and 8, a slenderness ratio has to do with the how the if the cross sectional area is very less compared to the length. So if it is a slender, whatever we mean in the word English, slender is a thin tall kind of structure. If it is that, the slenderness ratio is high and the compressive strength decreases, so it tends to buckle like this, like something like this. Then if I have to apply load, it will buckle something like this. So that is a problem for slender structures, not structures. So that is why it is a problem in steel more than that compared to concrete, because in concrete the cross section areas are much larger and the slenderness ratio will be negligible. Like it won't actually seriously affect the compressible limit. And deflection is the serviceability mode of failure. So that is same for, not same, but that we encounter both in concrete structures and steel structures. And there are we looked at the two design philosophies: the working stress method and the limit state method. Limit state method is what is used in the most of the design codes today. So now the design action should be less than the design strength. That is the working equation of limit state method design. We get the design action by multiplying the working action or the working load with action means load and strength means the capacity. So we multiply the load with a factor greater than 1 to get the design action, and we divide the strength or capacity of the element, that could be the shear strength, that could be the flexural strength or the buckling strength, by a certain factor. So we are designing against a greater load than what we expect to be coming on the structure, and we don't allow it to go up to the maximum strength either. So that inherently these partial safety factors bring some safety into the system and increases the reliability. Now then in the first few weeks we look at the connections. Connection is very important in steel structures. They are integral parts of any steel structures that have a major role in overall integrity. Standard parts are properly connected to create the steel structures. This is important because, as I've said, unlike concrete structures that are cast in an integrated manner, in steel structures the materials, the beams, columns, and the girders, what we call, they are brought from the factory and then they have to be assembled at the site. So the connection design is very critical, and it is even more critical because it has been seen that collapse or failure of steel structures often occurs due to the failure of a particular connection. So connections are sometimes the weakest link of a structure, and they have to be designed very carefully. Connections make up a large amount of the cost of structural steel as well. So connection design should be given top priority for both safety and structural economy. There are two types of majorly two types of connections: bolts and welds. The bolts are separate entities made of like consisting of a shank and this head, and then it is tightened with a nut to so that the bolts act with two different types of actions. One is the friction type bolts, where the nut is tightened sufficiently enough that so that the plates, this may not be the plates, this could be one, could be an angle, like one could be one leg of an angle, this could be the flange of an eye section, whatever we are connecting together by the bolt. If the nut is tightened sufficiently, there will be a normal reaction transfer between the two surfaces, and then as a result friction will generate, that is the coefficient of friction into the normal reaction, as we know, the coefficient of static friction. So that friction itself will resist the load coming on the load that has to be resisted. And then there is another type of all the bearing and shearing bolts, which do not work even if even if some friction is developing, we ignore that part, and we assume that the bolt material itself takes the bearing and the shearing and resists the force. And welds are work on a different principle. In welds, the mother material itself is uh, used to melted, is put here and put at the junction of two plates, and it is melted and then allowed to cool down again. So it is a kind of it's kind of integrated. And bolts are easier during repair and replacement because bolts are separate entities, but welds get integrated into the structure, so they are not that easy to replace. Last class, then we have looked at tension members and compression members, and last class and today's class are about the beams. So steel beams, this is an image of steel beams. And beam design, the beams must be adequately proportioned for strength in bending, taking into consideration local and lateral instability of the compression flange, necessary shear strength and bearing resistance of beam section, these are this bending and local and lateral instability and shear strength and bearing resistance are all related to the ultimate limit state. The sufficient stiffness, keeping in view that deflections and deformations are within limits specified under service load conditions. This is the serviceability criteria, and the stiffness here is relevant because the basic governing equation of any structure is that the force vector is equal to the stiffness matrix into the displacement vector. So the larger the stiffness is, the less the deformation would be. So there should be a sufficient stiffness so that the deflections or deformations are less enough to fall within the limits. And the other criteria apart from ultimate limit state and serviceable limit state is economy, by paying attention to the grade of the steel to yield and the amount of materials used. Now, achieving the optimum bending resistance, the beam material must be displaced far off from the neutral axis as far as possible to have a large amount of moment of inertia of beam section. Web area must be sufficient enough to have adequate shear resistance. So this what I said in last class, that for I sections generally, or for any section, for channel sections, it is generally seen that the flanges have a greater resistance in flexure and a less resistance in shear, because because they are the flanges are far away from the neutral axis, and moment resistance also depends on the radius from the neutral axis. So that's why. And the shear is, the web has a greater capacity in shear and very less capacity in flexure. So there is an idealization we make that to satisfy the flange, to satisfy the flexural requirements, we will look only at the flanges, and to satisfy the shear requirements, we'll look only at the web. So this is what is said here. And there are some challenges like lateral buckling of beam or buckling of compression flange or web. This buckling of compression flange or web generally occurs directly under a point load. In beams, we know that there can be uniformly distributed load and there can be point loads. So under every point load, we have to check that there is no local buckling in the web. And increasing depth increases flexural resistance but reduces resistance to lateral or web buckling. That is very, very obvious, because as we increase depth, the flanges get far and far offset from the neutral axis, so the flexural resistance increases, but the web is becoming more slender. So the compressive strength of the web will decrease and it might undergo buckling before. So before the entire flexural resistance is realized, it will fail in buckling. So there will be no point. So that is where we have to draw the line. These are some types of beam sections. This is just an eye joist. This is an eye section with two plates attached at its ends with bolts, and then this is a built up section. This is one plate, this is another plate, this is another plate, and they have been welded in such a such a manner that they act as an eye section. Then this is also a built-up section of, this is one plate, and then there are four angles that are bolted here. This also acts the same way as an I section, and these are a collection of several types as a plate, then these two plates, then four angles. This is another kind. This kind of configuration is also represented in SP1, as I showed last class. Their properties are, some of those properties are also mentioned, like not all combinations of I sections and C sections, but some common ones have been mentioned. Then these are also used hollow sections. Normally used beam sections are of open type, where the majority of the material is distributed in the flanges away from the center of gravity of the beam section. This enhances the in-plane flexural resistance of the beam. Also, open sections are very convenient in making the connections with other members. Major drawback of open sections is that open sections are quite weak in flexural strength about the minor axis. It also has less torsional resistance. Angles and T sections are quite weak in bending, and channel sections can only be used for light loads. So, channel sections are often used in trusses. Rolled steel I sections are generally adapted as beam section. Closed sections have a very high torsional strength but are difficult to make connections with other members. I section, being the most preferred beam section, can either be a rolled section or a built up section, as I showed. An I section with covered plates is required, where large sectional modulus is required, which cannot be furnished by the available rolled I sections. This built up I section may either be welded or riveted or bolted. So, what happens is that there are some I sections available, but sometimes we see that even like taking a large I section, it's not enough for the flexural resistance. But if we go to the higher one, it gives too much flexural resistance, so it becomes uneconomical. So between that, to if you want a resistance between that, we can use plates, and we have the freedom of increasing or decreasing or the thickness of the plate. So we can just see that, so that it is sufficient to resist the flexure, the factored flexure, but it is not too much above that, too much higher than that. For beams subjected to lateral loads at compression flange along with transverse load, there an I section, preferably ISWB, Indian Standard Wide Beam, along with a channel section in the compression flange is used. For example, beam section of gantry girders. Channel and angle sections as beam. The use of channel section and angle section as beam must be done with due care, because load is not likely to be in the plane, which eliminates torsional eccentricities. The plastic moment carrying capacity, we have looked at that in last class, that this is the elastic, this is where the plastic elastic section ZE develops when the extreme fibers are at Fy, when the extreme fibers have reached the yield stress, but the profile is completely linear. Then after that, if we still increase the moment on the beam, on the section, what happens is that it starts to plastify from the top and the bottom. So at this stage, up to this part and this part, the part above this and the part above this line has completely plasticized, but the inside part is still linear. And then a time comes when the entire section is under its yield stress, and that is the plastic moment capacity, that we relate with Zp. And the Zp multiplied by the yield stress is, we get the Mp, which is the plastic moment capacity of the section. And we can show from equilibrium condition that during when the structure is in, when our section is entirely plasticized, the area in compression must be equal to the area in tension. So it happens that the neutral axis, that this plastic neutral axis shifts from the elastic neutral axis. And the elastic neutral axis, there is no criteria that the area in it must divide the area, tension and compression area, into two equal halves, but the plastic neutral axis does do that. So in, if it is a rectangular section, the plastic neutral axis will pass through its midpoint. Or if it is a symmetric section about the x-axis, for example, in a channel section or in an I section, the plastic neutral axis will pass exactly through the center point of the web. And if it is an unsymmetric section like an angle section, we have to calculate that. We can just assume depth of the plastic neutral axis, and we have to apply this criteria that the area above it and the area below it should be equal. Classification of beam cross sections: plastics, compact, semi-compact, and slender. These are encountered while designing in the code. Different elements of a cross section: the internal elements, outside elements or outstands, and the tapered elements. The internal elements are those attached along both edges both the edges to longitudinal stiffeners connected at adequate intervals to transverse stiffeners or other elements. This mainly includes the web of eye section, the web and flange of box section. The outside element or the outstands are the flange overhang hang of eye section, the legs of angle sections, web of T section. They are basically attached. They are attached to only one of the longitudinal edges to an adjacent element, and the other edge is free to displace out of the plane. So in an angle section, the point where the both the legs are attached is the so each leg is basically attached to the other leg at one point and free to displace in the other end. So they are the outside element or outstands, and tapered elements are flat elements with average thickness is given by SP61. Okay, so lateral stability of beams. When a beam is loaded, one of the flanges of the beam comes at compression and the other in tension. For economy in beam design, IZ is made considerably larger than IY. Such beams are because minor axis flexion is not actually an important limit set in beams. We know that beams are generally loaded transversely, so it bends about the major axis. So we want that it should have a high flexural capacity about the major axis. Such beam sections are quite weak in bending in the plane normal to the web, and thus compression flange of the beam is liable to buckle in the direction in which it is now free to move. So the buckling tendency increases as the ratio Iz by Iy increases. However, the bottom flange of the beam remains in tension and thus remains straight. Buckling is not an issue for tension members. But the bottom flange and web and compression flange acts as a unit and the whole section rotates. So there are two kinds of buckling that can occur. One is the buckling of the beam as a whole, and then there can be local buckling of the web or the flanges. All of these have to be taken into account during design. Laterally restrained or unrestrained beams. Okay, is there any doubt regarding previous class before I go to the design calculations?
Yeah, no, ma'am, nothing.
Okay. Laterally restrained or unrestrained beams. A beam can fail by reaching its plastic moment MP if it can remain stable up to the fully plastic condition. The stability is where the buckling comes in. That if it buckles before the entire see the if we were only concerned about the flexural limit state, or if only one flexural limit state happened to occur in the in a section, then we would only be concerned about then when the intersection becomes plasticized. But there are other limit states that can be reached before the intersection becomes plasticized. So that is why we have to see that whether the web is buckling, the whether the flange is buckling, or the beam as a whole is buckling. So this situation is possible when compression flange buckling of the beam is restrained and constituent element flanges and web do not buckle locally and are referred to as laterally restrained beams. With increasing transverse load, these laterally restrained beams will attain full plastic moment capacity. Laterally unrestrained beams, if failure occurs by lateral torsional buckling, the whole beam may buckle laterally between the supports. Local buckling of flange may occur, or local buckling of web may occur. Web may buckle in longitudinal or diagonal waves. Then in these cases the beam will fail well before it attains the full plastic moment capacity. So MP won't be reached, it will fail before that by some other mode. These types of beams which fail by lateral buckling are referred to as laterally unrestrained beams. Also, any of these type of failure due to instability can be either in elastic or the plastic range. When maximum bending stress is less than the proportional limit when buckling occurs, then failure is said to be elastic, else it is inelastic. A laterally restrained beam will fail by yielding if the beam is short, because if the beam is short, then the slenderness ratio will also be less and the resultant compressive strength will be high. Then elastic buckling if the beam is long, and inelastic lateral buckling if beam is of intermediate length. There was a similar pattern followed in compression members as well. For laterally restrained beams, the beams of plastic or compact shapes with lateral support throughout have nominal flexural strength equal to plastic moment capacity of the beam section. For a beam adequately supported against lateral torsional buckling, the factor design moment M at any section due to external loading must be less than or equal to the design flexural strength MD of the section. Here, the assumption made is that the web of the beam is stocky, that there is one criteria that d by tw is less than or equal to 67 epsilon, where d is the web of the depth of the web and tw is the thickness of the web. So this is basically a kind of slenderness ratio for the web, not exactly the slenderness ratio, but a kind of that. So the depth by divided by the thickness has an upper limit. In beams with plastic, compact or semi-compact flanges and slender web, the d by Tw is greater than or equal to 67 epsilon. The web is prone to shear buckling before yielding. When there is no shear buckling, the nominal shear resistance Vn equals plastic shear strength Vp of the beam section. This is the flexural strength. It has two cases, that low shear strength, low shear case where V is less than or equal to zero point 0.6 VD, and there is a high shear case where V is greater than zero point 0.6 VD, and there are different kind of, like, different criteria for plastic, like one plastic compact and semi-compact sections. If the for a high shear case, there is plastic and compact section as one formula, semi-compact sections as another formula. And for the low shear case, for plastic, compact, and semi-compact sections, the design frictional strength is given by this. And for slender sections, the design frictional strength for this low shear case is given by this. And there is the shear strength has to be checked. A typical beam is subjected to two types of shear, that is the transverse or vertical shear and the longitudinal shear. In general, transverse shear failure does not occur in beams because prior to that web crippling will occur, so making the beam to undergo failure. But transverse shear failure do occur in case of short and heavily loaded beams. Bending of beam gives rise to longitudinal shear, making the fibers to elongate in the lower side and contracting the fibers on the upper side. This is what, generally, if the, like, dead, since dead load and live load are transverse loading in the downward direction, we generally, that is what we consider, that it bends like this. So the top fibers are under compression, the bottom fibers are under tension. These fibers tend to slip over each other, and this effect is maximum at the neutral axis. The tendency to slip is being resisted by the shear strength of the material. The longitudinal shear is given by this formula, and the mean or the average stress is when divide the shear stress divide by the area of, here we take only the area of the web, because as I said, we are considering that only the web takes the shear force. But there is one thing to be noted here, that we are taking d into Tw. So let's go to an I section here. So here the d is not exactly taken from here. The d will be mentioned in SP6, I think. It will not be just the web part. It is, and it is not the overall depth. It is somewhere in between. The nominal shear yield strength is, which is arrived on the basis of von Mises yield criterion. This is why the root 3 factor comes due to von Mises yield criterion. Is this, and then there are some limits of deflections on the beam. These are generally in questions not considered, the deflection limit stress, unless it is specifically mentioned, because you are not expected to remember all these. But if it is mentioned, we have to check. The buckling strength of web, a certain portion of web acts as column to transfer the load from the beam to the supports. So there is a 45 degree dispersion, just like in foundation design we have seen a kind of, like, a dispersion from column to foundation. When the load is transferred, we assume a 45-degree dispersion. This is like that. The roll section, this is just an analogy, it doesn't have anything to do with it. Roll sections are provided with suitable web thickness so that web buckling is avoided. The TW has a role here. In case of built-up sections, it is essentially to check the buckling possibility of the web, and web stiffeners are provided if required. And the slenderness, since we are studying buckling, we have to look at the slenderness ratio. This is the radius of gyration, this is derived, and the slenderness ratio. And from this we can get the permissible compressive stress FC from the yield stress. We know that the compressive strength will be less than the yield strength based on the slenderness ratio. Then there is another mode of failing called web grip. Yes,
Ma'am, in the previous slide,
yes,
uh, here we took the effective length as 0. 0.7 times the length.
yes.
So can you explain about that one? Why we took that?
Uh, I think it has to do with. Wait, let me see. So fixed is 0.65, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So
Fixed
so,
fix is point.
so I think that okay, effective length of stress, single or double angle. See, basically, if you look at this I section, it is kind of this can be considered fixed at this point and fixed at this point. So,
Okay.
but the but it is not, it is mostly like it point 0.7 is great, it is greater than 0.65, because this fixity is not as rigid as an actual fixed condition, but still it
Hmm.
is, so that is why it is a little greater than 0.65, but it is not, it is, but still it has a, it does resist moment to some extent. So I think there will be some kind of calculation behind this, but it is closest to 0.65 because it is nearly fixed but not completely, so it is a little greater, because as
So
it becomes,
this point 7D is like from the code, point 7D.
yes, right, it is in the
Okay.
code, right? It should be in the code.
I didn't check, so I was asking.
It has to be in the code, because all
Okay.
design is, will I check? One second. Do you know which chapter that is there? I think it should be this one.
It should be in one. Try 8.4.1.1.
What did you say?
8.4, ma'am. Around 8.4, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, 8.4. Effective length for simply supported beams. See, there is fully restrained, both flanges fully restrained is 0.7 L.
Hmm. Okay.
Compression flange fully restrained 0.75 L. So yes, this is what is applicable here, I guess.
Hmm. I guess. Okay, ma'am. Right. So
Anything else?
this is kind of separate for. I mean, in this situation, for crippling, you have to take in this way. So this is not same like under compression number.
No, it is not same, because in compression member the loading was in a different direction, right? This is the I
Yes.
section, it would be like compression along this length, along this, but here it is due to a different kind of loading we are
I
loading.
mean, I was considering compression member for that particular web. If you consider for that particular web thing, the top flanges are loaded, so just the
Mhm.
web.
It
I
won't be,
thought that.
because okay, you are saying that just that web is acting like a plate kind of thing. No, that won't happen.
Huh,
Since the flanges are
okay.
there, we have to take an effect. So that is why this is coming.
Okay, ma'am, right.
This all this I think this BT and all, this entire slenderness ratio has been calculated keeping in mind that there is a flange and the web as a single entity.
Hmm. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay, ma'am. Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay. Web crippling. Crippling occurs near the in the beam in the web flange interface. So it generally occurs at the root of the section, and the code provides an expression for computing the crippling strength of web as this. It is just a formula that has to be applied. TW is the thickness of web. FYW is the yield stress of the web, which is generally of course the flange and the web will have the same yield stress unless we are making a built-up section with different materials, which is unlikely. And this is the partial safety factor. And N2 is a length obtained by load dispersion to flange to web as flange to the web junction at a slope of 1.1 by 1 is to 2.5 to the plane of the flange. So n is this length. We have to assume a dispersion like this, and n is this length. The load transferred by bearing must not exceed web crippling strength. So for roll steel section, this provision is already accounted for, and thus for roll steel sections being used as beam, there is no need to check for this failure. So it is only relevant in the case of built up sections. When built up sections are used as a beam, then the web must be checked for web crippling. Procedure of design of beams is, we will select a suitable beam section. We have to check the section for the class where it belongs, the semi compact, compact, slender, um, and then check the section for its bending strength, then check the section for its shear strength, and check for the deflection of the beam. In case any of the above check fails, then the section has to be revised. And this is the design of laterally unsupported beams. For I section beams, Iy is less than Iz. So when the beam is loaded, it has a tendency to deflect sideways along with twisting. To reduce the possibility of lateral buckling, beams are provided with restraints at each end and at some intermediate points. This restraint against torsional rotation at supports is provided by either of the following ways: building the beams into walls, providing web and flange cleats. These they are the support, the restraints, bearing stiffeners acting in conjugation with bearing of the beams. Lateral end supports are frames which provide lateral restraint to the compression flange at the end. So there is an imperfection factor that takes into account the, I think, the shapes and for welded, whether it's rolled or whether it's welded, and there is a reduced bending strength FBD of the section, and the design bending strength is MD is beta ZP into FBD. ZP is the, okay, so for ZZP is a plastic plastic modulus, and FBT is this reduced bending strength, and beta is 1 for plastic and compact sections, and this shape factor ratio for semi-compact sections. Design of laterally unsupported beam is a trial and error procedure. All design is a trial and error procedure basically, but this is more like the compression member design. So we have to, since we don't know the FBD from before, we don't know the bending strength, so we have to assume a bending strength and determine the required ZP for the section. Based on that, we have to take a trial section and determine the actual moment carrying capacity of the section. So if that is less than FBD, then we have to again revise the section, and then all the usual checks are applied. There is an effective length for laterally unsupported beams. For simply supported and girders of span length where there is no lateral restraint to the compression flanges is provided, but end of the beam is restrained against torsion, the effective length LT shall be as per table 15. Okay, let's look at table 15. I think this one. So this is the table that we have to follow for the effective lengths, and I don't think destabilizing loading condition will be considered under normal loading conditions. So these ones, you have to identify which case is relevant in the question. In between the lateral restraints, the effective length of the segment is taken as 1.2 times the length of the segment. For cantilever beam of clear length L, effective length LT is taken as given in table 16. Okay, so table 16 has the based on the kind of restraint, we have some effective lengths for cantilevers. There are various mentioned here. These are a little complicated. These are more for practical structures than for academic purposes. I don't think the questions will be this complicated here. Then there is purlins. For simplicity, purlins is a laterally unrestrained beam. So there is a step by step process given here that resolve the factored loads normal and parallel to the sheeting. Purlins, I think, are used in factory sheds. So so, so yes, they are these are the purlins. There will be a sheeting on this, so we have to, oh no, these are, I think, these are the rafters, and this is the purlin that goes along this longitudinal way. We have to resolve the factored loads normal and parallel to the sheeting, determine the moment and shear forces about the two in-plane principal axes, ZZ and YY. Here the x-axis is considered along the beam, so Z and Y axis are what we are concerned about. In case of biaxial bending, the required section modulus about ZZ axis is given by this. So this is basically just following all the steps to design the purlin. I think purlins are included in the syllabus, but then they have very specified design procedure. They are not much conceptually here. So okay, do you have any doubt?
Yes, ma'am. In the procedure of laterally and laterally supported, if you go to the slide where you have shown the steps how to do it, one of these, yeah, please let's go to the back previous slides. Can you please?
This.
Yeah. Here in step three, we are checking for section for bending strength.
Hmm.
So in bending strength, we have some situation called whether the formula is for low shear or high shear.
Yes.
So we will be calculating the shear strength here. I mean shear load and shear, we'll have shear load coming from it, and shear strength
Yes.
we'll be comparing with it with
Yes.
0.6
Yes.
times.
0.6 times the shear strength. Yes.
So so indirectly we are calculating the shear strength of the section.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. We are calculating it, but then we have to check that section for its. Okay. Yes, we are actually calculating the shear strength there and there
Hmm.
itself. So, but there is one case that here we are saying that if wait, where is it? Hmm. So for this case, V greater than zero point 0.6 VD. VD is the capacity, right?
Yes,
And
ma'am.
V is the applied shear load. Now if there is a case, if here V is greater than VD itself, that means that this is not enough in shear. This section is not enough in shear. So in that case, we have to take a different section.
I mean, no, no. Can you repeat that again, ma'am? What you say?
That if
If
the V
we,
is the factored shear force coming on the structure on the beam,
huh,
and VD is the shear capacity.
huh.
So here we are to define the high shear and low shear, we are taking a factor of the capacity and seeing whether the applied shear force is greater or less than that. But
True, but if this the factor is like lower than the actual one, so it is, if the criteria fails here, it obviously will not carry the shear force. It is
exactly. If V is greater than VD, obviously it will not carry the shear force. And then we have to see
without
if
knowing VD value, we cannot go through this step, I guess.
no. VD for VD, you have to check the design shear strength of the beam section first.
Hmm.
So that has to be calculated first. Yes.
And
This is
also,
a
ma'am, in
this is the
the
capacitor for that,
later,
right?
this, uh,
This is how we calculate the shear capacity of the section.
yes, ma'am, this is the way.
Yes.
But also one more thing, ma'am, you mentioned like two shear strengths are there in the longitudinal. And I didn't go through when your lecture in the second slide or something. So not in the second slide. I mean, when the design process started in
Yes.
laterally supported one.
Yes.
Can you again like, explain about these two shears? Some with any pictures or something. Yeah. How
Okay.
these?
Yes. Transverse or vertical shear and longitudinal shear. Okay. So from this diagram, it's here that this is the transverse shear and this is the longitudinal shear.
Okay.
The longitudinal shear is in this direction and the transverse shear is in this direction, and the this transverse shear we can see how it is coming, like if it is a simply supported beam with a downward loading, this shear is very easy to perceive, and
Hmm.
this gives rise to web buckling or web crippling, and that occurs before the shear failure. So we are considering whatever we are considering during web crippling, this kind of failure is occurring due to a shear force along this axis.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, that was clear. But longitudinal shear is that is like in flange section. What like longitudinal shear
that,
is
that's what
only.
that's what I'm thinking. 1 second. Because shear is generally taken by the web, so I don't know why they are showing it in the flange. One second. See, transverse longitudinal shear in I section. Okay, so it is around this direction. This is a, but if this is the design, if this is the design against longitudinal shear, see, this is what it's saying. Bending of the beam gives rise to longitudinal shear. Oh, okay. This is just general. Just imagine the beam bending. Then the top fibers are compressing, right, and the bottom fibers are elongating.
Hmm.
So there is a kind of slip between the fibers, between the layers. There is a kind of slip. So that is the
No.
longitudinal shear. But now my question is that if they are writing the longitudinal shear is tau is V A y by I Z T, A is moment of area of cross section about neutral axis. So, but here they are taking the web itself. So, I don't know if this is the beam cross section is has a flanges here and then it is a web here, and the flange and web are like the neutral axis will go somewhere across the cut across the web somewhere. Suppose at the midpoint, if it is suppose at the midpoint or somewhere there, so the above part is undergoing a compressive shear and the bottom part is undergoing a tensile shear,
Hmm.
and the entire load that is taken by the web itself. So that is why this is divided by the web uh, area, the web cross sectional area. So it is a little difficult to perceive even for me. But you realize how the shear is arising, right? That you can perceive, right?
Actually, I mean, I'm raising this point is because even in Sir's lecture, this longitudinal shear is not like not mentioned. Only
But
uh,
the
the
design is
vertical shear
okay.
in
Okay.
the Sir's, yes. And also this okay, and also well, calculating. Okay, yeah, that's all. Yeah, right, fine. So is this like necessary or this is like a check or something?
This shear strength has to be the what we are
I mean,
designing.
particularly in the flange one, like in the longitudinal one.
I think this is just a concept that is generally not checked, right? Is the transverse shear checked in questions? Not no, right? Oh, sorry,
In
is
the
the longitudinal is not checked. The transverse is checked.
no. Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yes.
So I think this is just a case they are considering, but probably it is not. It doesn't become critical most of the time. So that's why it's just you need to know that it exists, but we don't design against it because transverse shear is the more critical, and even shear is not that critical in beams. We know flexure is always the most critical limit state in beams.
Yes. Yes. Okay, ma'am. Yeah, we can go ahead.
So this is an example. You have done examples on these.
Yes, ma'am.
So do you have any doubt about that? Because this is just two example, and if you already know the procedure, it's like if you have any doubt.
Mm, 1 second, ma'am. I'll just go through.
Yes.
In laterally supported beam procedure.
Yes.
Okay, these are this one related to laterally supported or unsupported?
This is laterally unsupported. This is a laterally unsupported. No, supported one. Supported one.
Okay, are we discussing about the problems in lateral unsupported ones, or that is next things?
It's not here, but if you have any question, you can ask.
Okay, like in one particular equation for there is some kind of MCR. It is
Okay.
like when the moment capacity in extreme fibers.
Hmm.
That and there are some terms. So I want to
Do you want to
like.
share the screen?
Oh, 1 second, ma'am. I will just try to open. Yeah, I will share, ma'am. Give me a minute. Can you see the screen, ma'am?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, ma'am. I'll just browse through the question. Okay. Huh. See, actually, this procedure can be bypassed using table 13 and 14,
Okay.
but since these were involved in this and these particular terms like here Ti and particularly these torsional constants and wrapping constants. I mean, what exactly are these? Like Iy, I can imagine, but these two are like new to me. So
See, torsion. You know, you can perceive torsion, right? If an open section. imagine an open section which the cross section is open, like it is something like this, and the
Hmm.
this is a cross section, the beam is going into the outside the plane, and this force is a torsional force. And
Yes.
warping is a damage mode that is related, that is occurred by torsion. Warping means that torsion is this thing, and warping means this, that one side is rotated like the torque is this way, one side is this way, so there is a warping kind of thing, a
So
deformation.
like a couple kind of thing. In
Yes,
general movement here in torsion, working is like couple of the torsion.
yes, I
Uh,
so okay, there is no decent picture, but yes, if suppose you can see the screen, if
oh,
this
one
is
second. Should
rotated, if this is, there is a torque this side.
yeah, share your screen, ma'am.
Oh, sorry, yes, I saw. So this, suppose what, so this is what, see, one side is the torsion is this side, in this side the torsion is this sense, so there is a warping. This is an abacus kind of diagram, that this is a warping. Okay, torsion is completely rotating in one direction, warping is in opposite senses. So that is what they're designing against here.
Got it, ma'am.
Okay.
One more thing, ma'am.
Yes.
And also can like what exactly this MCR, like it was mentioned, understood like saying extreme fibers movement capacity.
Okay.
How is that affected in the laterally unsupported procedure? Like,
You see, if it is laterally unsupported, then the warping and torsion are allowed. So that kind
yes.
of that kind of failure mode is allowed. So if there is, you can understand that if there is buckling, the compressive strength that we would generally have without buckling will be reduced if there is buckling. So if there is torsion or warping, any kind of that kind of failure mode, then the flexural strength that we were to allow, if there was no torsion or warping, we have to factor it down. That we will allow only, we can, like before the entire flexural strength is realized, it will fail by torsion or warping. It can also have a serviceability limit state, that beyond this angle displacement we are not going to allow, because it will have serviceability implication as well. So
Hmm.
that MCR is a reduced flexural strength, I think.
Okay. Okay. And also like in practical usage, yeah, well, laterally supported and supported. So if a long 10-meter beam is there,
Yes.
and if I'm placing any stiffener plate at 5 meter,
Yes.
so now this beam should be can be like calculated the movement capacity of 5 meter like unsupported, or should I take how it is done like should I break at the
Yes, I think that then I think warping and torsion will have a length component in that. So if there is only one stiffener at the center, then I think that for the length you should take 5 meter this side and 5 meter that side. If it's symmetric, just you can design for one taking the length as 5 meter. But if it has stiffeners at a certain interval, at a sufficient interval, then there will be no torsion at all. But if there is only one stiffener at the center, it is just breaking the effective length, I feel.
yes, it was breaking effective.
Yes.
So now I want to calculate the bending moment capacity of this particular beam,
Yeah.
like 10-meter beam with one particular on both sides of the flanges. It was having uh, the stiffener plate. So how should I calculate the bending capacity of this
You should
beam,
take
10
the
meter?
you should take the effective length, that L as 5 meter. There is an L in
Okay.
the formula, right?
Huh.
Practically differentiate the laterally. Okay, just 1 second. Okay, Rachana, we practically differentiate between laterally supported and unsupported. See, I don't think. What do you mean? What exactly do you mean by practically? By seeing?
I guess she meant that maybe.
But see, by seeing, it is difficult for us to say, because we are just studying it academically. But the way we laterally restrain a beam is by using stiffeners or cleats, so that we restrain the buckling, the torsion, the warping modes. And if there is, if the beam is there is a cross section and then there is a length and there is nothing, no, nothing restraining those modes. If torsion is allowed, warping is allowed, buckling is allowed, then it is a laterally unrestrained beam. And practically, by seeing, I don't know how maybe if we, let me see if there is a picture.
No, like what you're saying, it is like difference in practical also. Like if stiffener plates are there, that is like literally supported, or any walls are constructed like roof is there,
Yes,
it coming
yes.
medium. It is like by seeing itself, it
We
is not allowed
probably
to
will
be
be able to say yes. We probably will be able to say, seeing this, like there will be these kind of restraints here, and
and
if it is
sometimes there are some diagonal members to
yes,
connect it to other beams. In
yes.
roofs, particularly, we see in that, I guess.
Okay, okay, yes. I guess so, yes.
So something in between on the web, in between that area, like web and
Yes,
flange,
yes, yes.
if
Something
it is
between the web
covered
and
with.
some kind of out covering or some kind of stiffener that will restrain it.
Yes, I mean, I think we are talking about something. Huh, yes, the 10-meter beam is there, and a stiffener plate is located at 5 meter. So
Yes,
we should calculate these 5 meters beams unsupported lateral unsupported strength. We have to calculate, and that you should declare that one as the moment capacity of the total
yes,
beam.
yes, yes. Taking the length as 5 meter.
Hmm. Okay.
That's what.
So it's the same procedure then for if the stiffener plates are located at intervals like 1 meter interval. So I
Hmm.
have to take the 1 meter span and I have to go for the maximum movement
See, then I
and
think that if it is 1 meter, I think that then if it there is a restraint at every some interval.
mm,
Of course, it
mm,
depends on the interval length. But if it is mentioned in a question, or I don't know how big the 1 meter, how much implication the 1 meter will actually have. So I think there
mm.
should be a minimum interval gap, along which if you put the stiffness, it can be considered completely restrained, and that will be mentioned, because we that they won't just say that it is restrained at 1 meter and then you have to design it for 1 meter length as unrestrained. I don't think so. If an interval is mentioned, I guess we have to take it as actually restrained, but
I
there
think
will
the
be
same question raising up with lot Miss Rachna is asking like how we can differentiate
okay in the question you're saying. Then
again same question I guess.
okay, so have you ever encountered a question where it is just the interval length is mentioned but it is not mentioned whether it's restrained or unrestrained? I don't think
Mm,
I don't think that should be like that. There should not be that kind of ambiguity in the question.
yeah, for here, definitely they are mentioning in our assignments and all, but in general, when we are considering in
Okay.
this way,
So
maybe we
I
have
think
to.
I think there will be some kind of, we design two beams. Then what
Obviously, I mean, I mean, I guess you were saying we design two beams and we'll take the least moment capacity. Obviously, unsupported will come the.
one support and support. See, I think that we have to, there will be, then while we are designing, suppose we put stiffeners at 1.5 meter intervals, then I check for the torsion, and I see that see, it is practically impossible that there will be no torsion at all. There will be some kind of torsion, but if we
Mm,
see that it is below a certain limit that we can ignore the torsion completely, then we will say it is
mm,
laterally restrained. Or if we see that for 1.5 a significant torsion is coming, then I will reduce the interval. Suppose I put at 1 meter, then I put at 0.5 meter, and that is how we will see that when the torsion is below our limit, that just the way that we ignore some limit states when we see that it is incapable of causing failure. So if we see the torsion is less enough that it will never be the governing limit state or the critical limit state, we can say it is restrained. So that some kind of study has to be carried out in the field, I feel. And what
maybe what you're saying, like under the limit, like torsional thing under the limit. I think that is what maybe for laterally supported, and we
yes.
do not know what is the that value where we can ignore the torsional effect.
Yes, we don't know that, because we don't know that because we don't have all that practical experience. When you can ignore something or not, arises from two conditions. Two people can say that. One are the engineers who have a lot of experience, and the other part are the researchers. The simple design engineers who are just following the code cannot say that. That is why the codes provide us with all these data and
Hmm.
with a lot of research and experience going on behind that. You will never be
Like,
asked to make that
but
decision.
still, I think we should have more clarity with how a PIM is practically differentiated, literally supported and unsupported.
Yes, yes. And again, that kind of clarity comes only when you go to the site. That can never be learned in academic.
Ma'am, still see, even if you go to the site, it cannot be like it has to be theoretically written somewhere in the code. Unless this is written, even though if you go to the site, even how can they decide even on their experience?
Okay, let's see then. Is there anything mentioned in the code?
There should be some theoretical thing.
For beams which are provided to members giving effective lateral restraint to the compression flange and intervals along the span in addition to the end torsional restraint. The effective length for lateral torsional buckling shall be taken as the distance center to center of the restraint members. This is what you were saying. This point is that you have to take 5
Hmm.
meter.
Hmm.
Effective
Okay, maybe after reading again that situation, I thought maybe laterally supported is like definitely should have continuously supported,
Hmm.
and when it is like having flanges, I mean, stiffener plates.
Yes.
Even if stiffener plates are there, we will be consider it as unsupported, but the LTT value, where the effective length, for that particular LTT value, we will calculate our movement strength, and until we get lower than the movement coming on the beam, we will keep decreasing this stiffener length, I guess.
Yes, yes, yes. That's what
That,
that's an iterative process though.
hmm, okay.
Okay.
But this should be confirmed. Well, I will check on that one.
Yes, I will also have to read through the code once that if anything is mentioned here. Like there are some
And
kinds of
also, yeah, please, ma'am, go ahead.
yes, there are some kind of criteria given in the code like the shop welding and the site welding factors of safety. That is
Hmm.
just left up to the discretion of the engineer. That shop welding and site welding are not literally shop welding and site welding. It is depending on the amount of quality control there, quality assurance in the welding process. So this could be something like that as well. That whether it is laterally restrained or unrestrained is up to the discretion of the engineer.
Okay. Mhm.
Okay.
In the procedure, like, do you have any question them in for the I mean problem solved for laterally unsupported?
A Perlian
I
is a,
think you do have. Yeah,
a
I will maybe I
Perlian.
will share the again in the week.
Oh yes, yes, sure, sure.
That would be it. If you have, please open. Otherwise, I will.
No, you open. I'll see.
Okay. And can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. And this condition.
Hmm.
This I didn't find in the this one code, I guess. Something happened, like how this one came up. I was guessing like greater than 0.4. I didn't get this part.
So the effect of lateral. Okay, so there is a criteria like this. So whether we will consider the effect of torsional buckling if this lambda is greater than point 0.4. Wait, the lambda is calculated with what is the beta b?
The ZD by ZP.
Okay, then into zp into fi divided by mcr. Okay, you want to. So this is the criteria that we have to see to like we have to follow to see whether we have to consider it as restrained or unrestrained. And now you're asking for the practical implication of this quantity, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Let me see. The non okay, this is the non-dimensional slenderness ratio. This
Huh.
is called the slenderness ratio. So, just like like in compression members, if the slenderness ratio was above a certain limit, we will consider the see. It was in compression member. It was like with the slender as the slenderness ratio increases, the compressive stress allowable will decrease. That kind of a
Hmm.
relation we had. Here they are saying that if this is the slenderness ratio is above this limit, we have to consider lateral torsional buckling. Otherwise, we will not consider it. So we this is understandable, right? If your sentence ratio increases, torsion, buckling, these kind of things become problems.
I mean, so here in this, I think in this situation, if this is less than 4, I think I showed you like the IT value and wrapping constant and
Warping constant warping and torsion will be considered.
torsion. See, ma'am, this is already considered, and after this calculation, this is done with respect to MCR.
Okay,
So
so
we already consider the constant with respect to torsion and all,
so is that
and
local? I think that was local torsion and warping. Is there any local or global given here? Wait, go up. Show me the torsional. Show me the warping and torsional constants.
hmm,
Oh, so this has no length term. The what is ly okay iy, so this is I think this is the local thing, that the web and the here the parameters are only the web and flange parameters, only depending on the cross section. So here it's only the local warping and torsion kind of thing, and the afterwards what was there, it has, I think it has to do with the global buckling that we are global torsion that we are seeing, where the
hmm,
resistance, the interval of the resistance will also matter.
huh, huh. And did you understand these terms from like BITI cube? Did you understand BITI cube? How?
Yes, yes. So B and B is the width and T is the thickness, I guess. Is this a box section? No, is this a I
No, ma'am.
section?
This is I section. I
Yes.
section.
So
Yes.
so for you see the BITI are the all or the three members, the flange, this web and the flange. So the two into thing is about the flange. I think the thickness of the flange is 150. Sorry, the width of the flange is 150. Thickness is 9.4. And for
Hmm.
the web, the width is the thickness is 6.7 and the width is 300 would be the overall depth minus the flange thicknesses. So
Fine.
this the web, so that is what they are doing. The you understand width
Mm-hmm.
into the thickness cube.
Yes, ma'am. Now I got it. So this divided by 3 is like for everyone, or this is, I think this is for I section again. Divided by 3.
Probably there should be some torsional constant, right? This again it should be there in the code. Torsional, no, for all open sections. Torsional constant is sigma BI cube by 3 for open section. This is in clause 8.2. 8.2 elastic lateral torsional buckling moment. 8.2.2.1, page 54 of the IS code.
Page 54. Okay, ma'am. Wait, I will look into that one. This one, that's all for my side.
Okay. Okay, then I'll end the class.
Sure,
So,
ma'am.
thank you for attending.